category. But let's break this down a little bit. You have this fear, which is so unlikely, right? So unlikely, versus a host of benefits to letting your kid walk to school. You know, they'll get exercise, and we know that kids need more exercise than they're getting right now. It might be an opportunity to socialize with their kids. It might be an opportunity for independence, right? You know, to exercise a little bit of independence on their way to school. It also might just be fun, or an opportunity for a little bit of reflection in an otherwise busy life. So we're weighing this fear against these other tangible benefits, but these benefits are much more amorphous, right? They're hard to measure, hard to pin down, as opposed to this incredible, this sharp fear. So why do we make this calculation? What's going on? Well, this is a good opportunity to dig in a little bit deeper on a lot of the cultural forces that impact a host of decisions. And yes, fear does play a big role here. There's been a lot of really interesting research on the concept of fear and anxiety and stress. And if you believe the research, these traits have increased over time. We all have what's called a negativity bias. We're kind of hardwired to respond more strongly to negative news, to fearful stuff. And that makes sense from a biological perspective, right? That makes sense from an evolutionary perspective. You want to remember the bad stuff. Don't eat that plant. There's a tiger over there. That makes sense. But those forces now are playing out in modern times and can have an adverse impact. For example, there's really interesting research that talks about the degree to which negative headlines outperform positive ones. And that's one of the reasons that we see so much negative news, is because we're more likely to click on it, we're more likely to remember it, it's more likely to have an impact on how we see the world. And that brings me to number 2 here, and this is the availability bias. This is also having an impact on our decisions, not only in this context, but in a whole bunch of areas. And this is the idea that we're going to, if we remember something, it's more likely to have an impact on our decision making. So unfortunately, tragically, kids do get abducted, and they lead to these headlines. And we remember those headlines. We don't remember that this is incredibly rare, that this has never happened in my neighborhood. We remember that horrific headline, and that has an impact. And of course, the news plays that up because it is such a big story. The other thing that's going on here is pop culture. This is true, I think, in most countries, but especially in North America. And I know it's true in the UK. Look, there are a lot of crime shows out there like CSI, like Criminal Minds, that make it sound like there's a predator on every single corner ready to abduct your child, right? I love crime procedurals. I think I've seen them all. So I know about that pop culture force. And there's also really interesting research that says that this does have an impact on our perception of crime. It does have an impact on our levels of fear, this kind of pop culture portrayals. And the last factor I'll use this decision to highlight is the impact of peers. There is this fascinating sort of cycle that happens. It's been called the cohort effect. So as more parents start driving their kids to school, it becomes the norm. And parents start talking about it as if it's the norm. So if you don't drive your kid to school, you're viewed as being bad. And you might even think of yourself as being bad. And we've had actually personal experience with that. We've had neighbors who wouldn't let their kids play with our kids because we let them walk to school. So this is a real phenomenon that can have a real impact. Layer on top of that the role of social media and people talking about this on social media, and that power is heightened. The other thing that happens, speaking of cycles, is as more parents start driving their kid to school, then more parents get worried about another issue here. And of course, that's traffic, right? That's traffic. In fact, when kids do get hit by a car or have some kind of traffic incident, it's often very close to the school. How ironic is that? Parents driving their kids to school because they're fearful for their kids' safety. That creates traffic that actually increases the safety risk. So the takeaway from this is recognize those cognitive biases that impact our decision making. And I also recognize that parents have to make their own decision about the maturity of their own kid, their own neighborhood, et cetera, et cetera. I'm just inviting you to think about these cultural forces and to think about the cognitive biases that impact all of us. Okay, so the day is going on. You've dropped your kid off, and now you are driving to your job. And side note, I hope that you can active commute, ride your bike, walk. That's better. That's better for you. But if you must drive, you must. So you're driving to work, and what do you have to do now? You've got to park your car. You got to park your car. People absolutely hate parking. There's been really interesting research, some of it from the US, has shown this is one of the number one things that people hate the most. It stresses them out the most, and that's parking. And you guys, people waste a ridiculous amount of time parking. There's studies from New York City. Look, have you ever tried to park in New York City? It's just it's a gong show, right? But people spend over 100 hours a year trying to park in New York City, right? Days of the year are spent on trying to park their car. And partly that's because people are searching for the perfect parking spot. We're always trying to find the best parking spot, the closest parking spot. This was an interesting study that found that $71 billion are wasted in the United States, productivity from people driving around looking for the perfect parking spot. And my takeaway here, you guys, is park the damn car. There's not a game out there. You're not in a great parking competition. You don't get any awards for finding the best parking spot. In fact, they have done mathematical modeling that suggests the best way to park is always to park in the first spot that you see, even if it's pretty far away from where your destination is. In the aggregate, over time, that's the best choice. Park the damn car. And it's interesting because we all remember that great parking spot that we got, and we think we're going to get it again, right? There's almost this reward system. Ignore it. Ignore it. Park the car. Park the car. And that's another really interesting thing, is that we all think we're really good at parking, and you're not. And it reminds me of multitasking. That's these numbers down here. I don't know if you guys can see these numbers. It reminds me of multitasking because we all think we're great at multitasking. You're not. In fact, they've done some studies that have found that 97.5% of people are terrible at multitasking. So that's almost everyone listening to this. You're all terrible at it. But 70% of people think they're really good at it, right? Which is mathematically impossible and also not true. Parking's the same way. We all think we're great at parking, and we're not. And here's another really interesting stat. Women are better at it. Women are better at parking, even though men always think they're better at parking. No surprise there. But this was an actual study. This is a study actually done in the UK. And they tried to kind of objectively assess, who's the better parker. They watched a lot of people parking. And women are better at it. They're better at finding a spot. They're better at, lining up the car, et cetera, et cetera. And look at this stat. You see this 18%. But even though women are better at it, only 18% of women think they're better than men. That, I think there's a lot to unpack there. Very interesting. Okay, so the day is rolling on. You're working hard. You're at your standing desk. Maybe is that necessary? And you've had lunch, and now you're back. Let's say it's 2 o'clock. It's 2 o'clock, and you're back in your office. And you think, you know what? I haven't drank enough water a day. Aren't I supposed to drink 8 glasses of water a day? No, you're not. That's a myth. That's a myth. I'm going to do this one really quickly, because it's just a really good example of how a health myth, can take hold, and it just will not dissipate. There's really no evidence to support the idea that you're supposed to drink 8 glasses of water a day, but this idea will not go away. So it's a good example for me of always, ask yourself, is that true? Is that true? Do I really need to do that? You know how often you should drink? You should drink when you're thirsty. Thanks, evolution. Thank you. Okay, so now we're moving through the day a little bit more. You've gone home, and we've gotten now to my favorite time of day. It's a little past 5. Let's say you've gotten home. It's exercise time. So important. So first I'm going to ask, is there a good time to exercise? Is there the right time to exercise? This is another thing that gets a lot of headlines, that there's some magical time to exercise. You'll burn more fat if you exercise in the afternoon. You'll have a good impact on your hunger if you exercise in the morning. You're going to be better at exercise, and you'll work harder if you exercise in the late afternoon. You know when the best time to exercise is? When you want to exercise, when it works for you. The most important thing about exercise is to do it. Find something that you love. And this has actually been a switch for me. I'm a science geek. I always, I'm also an exercise geek. So I always, go through all the data on it. And yes, there are kinds of exercise that if you're talking about trying to have a metabolic change, actually try to have a physiological change in your body, things like, weights and interval training, probably the best way to do it. But the reality is, moving is just so important, just so valuable. I think you can ignore most of the exercise noise and just find something that you like and do it all of the time. So yes, when's the right time to exercise? Anytime is the right time to exercise. Find a time that works for you, but we don't do it enough. And this is another opportunity to think of our own cognitive biases. You see these data up here, and this is actually recent UK data. People exercise much less than they think. They think that they exercise more. In fact, 36% of people think they exercise much more than they actually exercise. And if you're someone that doesn't get enough exercise, 61% of that cohort of individuals think they exercise more than they actually do. And this is a really good example of, how self-report is unreliable. This is a good example of how we're often not aware of ourselves. And we're also not aware of our kids, of the behavior of our kids, and which again is very interesting because we have this disconnect between our intentions, which is always what's the best interest for our kids. But look at this really dramatic data. This is from Canada, from some colleagues at University of British Columbia. 88%, see that 88% of Canadian parents think their kids exercise enough, like they meet the guidelines, when in reality only 7% do. So this is really just an invitation to reflect, to ask yourself about the reality of your own life. Okay, so the day is moving on a little bit more here, you guys. Perhaps you're making dinner. It's 6:15 p.m. Kind of close to now, and maybe some of you guys are doing this right now. You're having a glass of wine. You're having a glass of wine. So what's this an opportunity to talk about? This is an opportunity to talk about something I'm personally fascinated with, and something I really dug into when I was writing the book. And this is the illusion of difference. So maybe you're having a glass right now. I hope you are. Does it make a difference if that wine is expensive or not? Can you really tell the difference? What's fascinating here is there's actually quite a bit of research on this. Again, some of it from the UK. That has suggested that, nope, we can't tell the difference. These are studies where they've done blinded taste tests. Sometimes these studies are actually quite large, and they find that people can't tell the difference. They've even done studies on wine experts, and it's almost random. There is this kind of profound illusion of difference. So that's what, this 53%. See, this was a study that I think it was done in Edinburgh, where they did this very straight up study. It was about 600 people, and they had blinded people pick between expensive wine and cheap wine, and it was very straightforward, you guys. I just had to ask, what's the expensive wine, what's the cheap wine? And I think this study is really interesting because a lot of people get angry at this part of my book because, oh, of course I can tell the difference. And a lot of people say, well, there's a floor. I can, maybe there's no difference between these wines, and you should, difference between really expensive wines. But I can tell the difference between a cheap wine and an expensive wine. And the answer is probably not. Probably not. Only 53% of the people in this study were able to tell the difference. In other words, almost random, almost flipping a coin. So this is that illusion of difference. So again, it's sort of this invitation for you to ignore the noise. And it's good news, right? It's good news. You can ignore the noise and drink what you like, and to be fair, I'm kind of picking on wine. I got to be fair to wine, right? Because we do this with so many different things. I love coffee, as I said. I'm the first person to buy, to go to that hipster coffee shop and pay like $12 for a flat white. But studies tell us that, again, we're terrible at teasing out what's good coffee and bad coffee. Look at this study. This was a fascinating study, dog food. Why do I have that up there? They did a study, you guys, and they found that people can't tell the difference between dog food and expensive pâté. Remember that the next time you're feeding Fido. Maybe try the dog food. I don't know. It's cheap pâté. Okay, so the day is going on. You know, you want to start winding down, which is a good idea, by the way. We all want to wind down. And so what are you going to do now? You're going to start binging some television. Binging, and 80% of people do that now. It's kind of become a cultural norm. Would you guys agree? Binging. 80% of people do this. At least they say they binge TV. That's me. I love TV. I'm a little bit of a TV geek. I love it. So it's the age of great TV, right? 80% of people binge. Is this a good idea? Where does the research tell us about binging? Well, the research is really interesting here. And again, we have to be careful not to over interpret the data, but we also have to recognize how extreme binging has become. For example, there's this phenomenon called speed binging. Have you guys heard of it? It's a contest. 400,000 people watched all of Stranger Things when the latest season came out in one day, right? People feel compelled to watch these shows as fast as possible. You know, it's almost like, again, they're winning some kind of competition, or they're able to control the spoilers in the universe. So people are watching these things very very quickly. In addition to that, of course, you know that these shows are increasingly structured to compel you to binge, right? You know, if you got that cliffhanger, you want to find out what's happening next. You become very invested in these characters. And also the shows are all the binging services allow you to click on the next show. I did that last night, I think 4 times. So this has an impact. So, but what does the evidence say about it? Is this a good idea? Is it a good idea? Well, again, we have to be careful not to overinterpret the data, but binging has been associated with poor diet. It's been associated with a decrease in exercise. It has been associated with mental health issues. And again, correlation, causation, got to watch this data. But there is an interesting body of data emerging that at a minimum asks us to be cautious, right? There is also really interesting data. This is a 63% here, 63% of students, of university students, say that binging has become one of the biggest impediments to their scholarly pursuits, right? It's hard to study when you've got to find out what happened next on Game of Thrones. So it does have an impact. Again, I'm saying this over and over again, but I think it's really important. Let's not overinterpret this data. But some of my colleagues, psychiatrists, Stan Kutcher, who's now a senator in our parliament. Stan Kutcher has suggested the real danger here is that in what has binging replaced, right? Has it replaced exercise? Has it replaced hanging out with your family? Has it replaced a long and fun meal? So always ask yourself, what is binging replacing? And of course, the answer is that you do this in moderation. And again, I'm guilty. I love TV. And so there's a lot of tricks that you can use. Say I'm only going to watch 2 shows and try to stick to it. Force yourself to get up after every show. A lot of things that you can do. You've got to find yourself, a good rhythm, one that works for you. And I do want to end with this. And this is my drawing of a printing press. What do you guys think? Is it any good? The reason I put this up is we also have to be careful not to overinterpret it. We don't want to become technophobes, right? We don't want to overinterpret the data of harm here. People thought that seriously, people thought that the printing press was going to lead to an information overload. People weren't be able to handle all that information, so we better slow down the production of stuff off the printing press. People said the same thing about radio. They said the same thing about comics. They said the same thing about TV. They said the same thing about the internet when it first hit. So we have to be careful not to overinterpret the data about the harm of technology. It's not going away, right? It's not going away. But at the same time, I think we need to reflect. There is an opportunity to try to figure out how this technology can fit into our world in a constructive manner.